Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Morning Sign-In, the show where we break down health and science topics in ways that are easier to understand. So before we jump in, we'd like to remind you that we're not medical professionals. We're just students that care about health literacy, and if anything we discuss connects to your own health, the best next step is always to talk with somebody who is qualified. So today we're going to be talking about autism, specifically what autism can look like in college, how experiences vary across the spectrum, and how we can be better classmates, friends, and community members. So autism is discussed more openly than ever, but it's still really misunderstood. So today, to help us understand this better, we're joined by someone who actually studies it. I'm really excited to welcome Megan Downing, who is a third-year psychology student here doing research in autism. Megan, thank you for being here today.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, I'm so excited to be here. Like Laura said, I'm a third-year psych major. I love researching autism. I've been doing it for about 2 years, so I'm really excited to talk to you guys today about some of the work I've been doing.
Great, definitely. This is going to be a great show. So I guess to begin with, I'd really love to know what got you interested in studying autism in the first place.
Yes, I'm really glad you asked. So I started studying autism last year. I had the opportunity to become a research assistant for an independent research project that was going on. And the topic was around the intersectionality between somebody being LGBTQ+ and then also being autistic. So I had the opportunity to do some of the data analysis for that project. And something that really caught my attention with it is autism is being studied more than ever, in previous years. And it's really important because now we're actually listening to autistic voices, which really wasn't studied in the past. But something that really caught my attention during that project was the topic of autism intervention. And ever since then, I've really been hooked. And it's just honestly my favorite thing to study. So definitely that research project last year really, really got me hooked.
Great. So when did you switch over to intervention? Was that like last year?
It was honestly probably it was last year, but probably during the summer. I had the opportunity to do a literature review for one of my psych electives. And I studied applied behavioral analysis, which is a type of intervention for autistic people. And it's really interesting. And then also, more so over the last 20 years, it's been changing rapidly. So yeah, I had the opportunity to sort of dive into that. I got to do this really cool literature review on it. And then ever since then, I just can't stop reading about it, honestly.
No, definitely. It sounds like a field that's kind of evolving very quickly.
Very much.
Right. So I guess we already covered what research you focus on right now, but I guess is there something that a lot of people misunderstand about what you study?
I feel like the specific field that I really go into, like I said before, is with autism intervention, and there's a million and one ways that somebody could do autism intervention. Originally began with applied behavioral analysis, which was actually coined at UCLA.
Really?
Yeah, actually, it was in the basement of Pritzker Hall, I believe, from someone named Dr. Lavasse, and he created it in Pritzker Hall. And I must say, really was not the most ethical thing, truly, right? But over the last that was created in the 60s, so over the last 60 years since, it's really evolved into a bunch of different ways. So we sort of strayed away from applied behavioral analysis. People moved towards the early Denver START model, which is a little bit different, in which parents of autistic children really focus on providing intervention. And then more so, we have a professor here named Dr. Kasari, who's amazing, and she created her own sort of autism intervention that really focuses on play. So really young kids can come into her clinic and they focus on, sensory tasks such as like putting a lion-shaped block into a lion-shaped hole, and it's really cute. The kids are amazing. But yeah, so it's definitely changed. But I think there is not a whole lot of public knowledge about intervention because a lot of people haven't ever had to think about it, honestly. So, when they, do find out what it is, it's a whole world that opens up.
No, definitely. So those earlier intervention methods that were mentioned, wait, what was the first one called again? It was analytic.
Applied behavioral analysis.
Oh, applied behavior analysis. Okay. So it's evolved more from more non-ethical ways to intervene with autism to something more approachable for children?
Yes. So originally, applied behavioral analysis really focused on punishment and reinforcement, right? And the things that kids were being punished for or reinforced for really appealed to normalcy, right? So, these kids behaving in a way that was bad as all. They're just autistic, they behave differently. It's not,
That's awful.
exactly.
Yeah.
But thankfully that's completely changed, which is lovely, and I'm really happy to hear about that. But yeah, so it's really straying away from things that are based on punishment and reinforcement and trying to find ways that we can treasure autistic traits, and then also try to provide the best quality of life as well.
Right. So what do these, I guess, intervention methods do for autistic children?
Yeah, so more so in recent years, when we focus on interventions as of recently, interventions really try to treasure autistic traits in the ways that, some individuals who are autistic use self-stimulatory behaviors, which is more commonly known as stimming, right? So it might include someone shaking their hands up and down or different things like that. And that's something that is treasurable because it's not bad in any sense. It's just different. And, most people don't stim, but it doesn't mean that it's a bad thing to do it, right?
No, definitely. I guess like breaking it down a little more, like what are some, I guess, traits that are considered autistic, or what would we characterize as autism in the first place?
Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing about autism is that it's incredibly idiosyncratic. So, individuals who are autistic, they may behave in a plethora of ways, really depending on the specific individual who has autism. There are more stereotypical behaviors such as stimming that we talked about. Heightened interest is another one that's another trait of autism that can be common. According to the DSM-5, one of the main things is quote-unquote repetitive behaviors, and so that involves both stimming and heightened interest. And then another one that, some people talk about is some lacks in social communication. So for some people, this might include like a very neutral tone of voice when talking, which also, is not bad. It's just different, right?
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot of different ways that autism can show up, and I think that's another interesting part of trying to diagnose somebody with autism is it shows up in so many ways. So it can be difficult sometimes for diagnosing professionals to try and go about that, especially if there is a huge issue in autism research in which people who are diagnosed as autistic, in the past, it was mostly only young boys, and
Really?
thankfully, yeah, exactly. It was honestly just this like archetype that they had created that autism can only be diagnosed in young white boys, which is completely untrue. It's it was a stereotype that was really harmful for a long time, and honestly to this day it still shows up a lot, but more so over the last few years, there's been a lot of work to try and integrate, these different identities. So somebody can be a person of color and still have autism, or somebody can be a woman or transgender or queer and different things and still be autistic.
Right.
So it's really trying to reintegrate that sort of mindset that was really harmful for a long time.
It definitely sounds harmful. I guess that's why autism is a spectrum, right? So some people have worse or more traits than others, or more severe traits than others. Is that right?
Yeah, so that definitely opens up a much larger conversation. So it is called autism spectrum disorder, but yeah, I have 5 amazing research assistants, and they are just fantastic. And we were talking about the term autism spectrum disorder maybe 2 weeks ago, and we were talking about how it's really difficult to place somebody on a linear spectrum, right?
Yeah, I was always kind of wondering, like, how do they place somebody on such a wide range of, I guess, like, options? I don't know.
No, I definitely agree. So an example I gave is, let's say that we have, a young girl and she's in, her class and she really struggles with social communication, right? And it's really difficult for her to be inside of a classroom with so many other people, and it can lead to her to having meltdowns and having just a really, really difficult time emotionally, mentally, and behaviorally when she's in class, right? But, on the flip side, she is just fantastic with, like, arithmetic, right? Like, she scores the best in her class, right? So if we have an example of, she needs more support in one aspect, but she doesn't need support at all in math, where do you place her on a linear spectrum?
Right, because it kind of evens out a little bit,
It evens
right?
out, right? And it's like you don't want to take the mean of, like, what she, what she needs more support with, right? So it's very hard to place someone on a linear spectrum. So more so over the last few years, we've really focused on shifting from a linear spectrum the best way I can describe it is like a color wheel, right? So let's say you have a color wheel, right? And let's say somebody needs more support with social interaction. They don't need support in math, but they might need more support with like, I don't know, like a few different things, right? Somebody can like really excel in one area and need more support in another area, and that can be represented by something that's not linear, right? So then there's also the conversation of how do we switch the term autism spectrum disorder to something that doesn't represent a linear spectrum.
Right, because it seems like something that people would compare, right? Like it seems very comparable, which I don't think is the right kind of conversation.
Exactly. Yeah, you're saying all the right things. Like definitely it's a huge conversation too of just like if somebody needs more support in a few different areas, there is a lot of people who might compare them to somebody who might not need that extra support, and it leads to a whole lot of ableism and, a bunch of different things that can be, it really places a lot of pressure on autistic individuals.
Yeah, I imagine it would break down a lot of different accommodations as well. Like what would you deem, I guess, as what someone needs in like as support in say like college campuses? Like if you need accommodations, I imagine it would be a little harder to get those accommodations that you need if there is this spectrum and you're considered to be, I guess, lower on the spectrum.
Right, yeah. So somebody who needs like less support, but they still, they need less support, but they still might need, assistance with certain things. It can be really hard for them to, be believed and, be helped because they're, people, some people describe autism as an invisible disorder. It's like in some cases, when you're having a meltdown, it's, not as invisible, right? But, when you're, if an autistic person is sitting there and they have all these thoughts racing in their heads, you can't tell by looking at them, right? And that makes it really difficult for a lot of people to get accommodations in a university setting. I know the project I worked on last year, it was really insightful because we got to ask a bunch of different individuals, like, who were autistic. We got to ask them, what would they like on a college campus? And a lot of things that they had asked for said that they, it wasn't at UCLA, right? And UCLA is an amazing institution who's, always trying to help, but, there's a lot of cases in which they weren't getting the support that they needed.
Oh, really? Like, did they specifically request anything?
Yeah, so one of the major responses we had was individuals who wanted an area for decompression, if they'd been overstimulated, because if we're being honest, Los Angeles is an incredibly overwhelming place.
It's so loud.
Oh my gosh, 24/7, right?
Always something going on, man.
Oh my gosh, and especially at UCLA, it's beautiful and it's a blessing, but also at the same time, it can be so much, all the time. So we did have some individuals talk about how they would love a decompression area, where they could sit for a while and not have, a million things going on. And since then, we haven't seen any inclination that would happen, which is really unfortunate, but it's definitely something that should be considered, and definitely I think it could be helpful for a lot of students.
No, definitely. I think that's very much needed. I mean, like, I know a lot of hospitals have, like, restrooms or, like, just areas with a lot of stress.
Exactly.
And I feel like schools, like, maybe not the same level, like, kind of stress, but it's still a very stressful environment nonetheless, and so having those spaces where you can decompress is really important.
I agree. Like, in universities, and also people talked about airports.
Oh, definitely.
I don't know about you guys, but the airport is, like, my least favorite place to be.
Yeah.
So
stressful.
Oh, my gosh.
Especially LAX.
Oh nightmare. So I think definitely it can be really important to just have these spaces for autistic individuals to be able to decompress. And also just, something that we talk about a lot in autism research is something called the universal design of learning, right? It's abbreviated as UDL because the name is super long, right? But it talks about how there can be accommodations, for people who, have disabilities or, need specific support with different things, right? So, for example, a quiet room in an airport, it can definitely help autistic individuals, but it can also help people who aren't autistic, It can be really nice for someone who's not autistic to also be able to go into a room where it's not 500 planes are flying around and there's a screaming baby and all of these things, It can still be, like, really helpful to, have that area, and yet we still don't see it, So I think definitely incorporating the universal design of learning can be, really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like something that would just benefit everyone, honestly. Like everyone's mental health. Like I feel like a lot of people, like I get overwhelmed sometimes as well, but I can't imagine what it's like with more amplified feelings and that. And so having that sort of space would be really helpful. Like I would appreciate that, Like,
I agree.
I think a
Definitely.
lot of people appreciate these kind of more mindfulness practices, like having a calm space where you don't have to worry about what's going around you all the time.
Most definitely. Yeah.
I love yoga. Yep.
I gotta get on that.
Gotta get on that. Gotta get on that meditation.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely, especially here at UCLA. Oh my gosh.
Oh my lord.
So I guess going off of that, can you think of any, I guess, myths surrounding this? Yeah.
Most definitely. I will say for autistic individuals, it's been a very difficult year. With just recent news coming out about autism that really isn't true. I think I'll say that. So it's definitely, within the last year we had, people say that it was Tylenol and acetaminophen causing autism. Yeah, I was like, I remember I was writing a literature review about autism in my living room, and I looked up, and it was on the news, and I was like, oh God, so it's, I will say that's just completely not true. There's no research behind that, right? And then also with not even autism, but most, psychological disorders or identities, it's never just really one thing that is causing the entire disorder, except for like a few things, right? So like, right. So, with Down syndrome, right? If you, have an extra copy of chromosome 21, you will 100% have Down syndrome, right? But, with things like autism, depression, anxiety, bipolar 1 and 2, cyclothymia, different things like that, it's never just one specific thing that causes that. It's really always, pretty confident it's always just an interaction between, a genetic component and the environment, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think that goes back to like the whole nature versus nurture argument, right?
Right. Most definitely. So it's like, it's never, Tylenol that's 100% causing autism, and more so, we shouldn't be putting blame on the mothers, right? Speaking of blame on the mothers, there was another theory a few years back, not as common anymore, which really happy to hear, but it's called the refrigerator mother theory.
What? That sounds awful. Just the name itself.
I know. Wait till you hear what it is, right?
Oh, no.
So refrigerator mother theory was saying that autism was essentially caused by a mother not showing enough warmth to their child, which, as the listener, you may presume that is so incorrect. It's not like, we're also putting the blame on the mother again, which is just like not helpful whatsoever, and also just not true, So there's a lot of things where people just say autism is the fault of the mother, and then, a few years back as well, there was the case where people thought that vaccines were caused by autism, and, since then that paper has been completely, removed from the earth, thankfully, right?
Yeah.
But that study itself was completely fabricated, and I think the sample size was like 16 people.
Really?
Yeah, so it's like, even if they found anything, which they didn't, it also wouldn't be reliable whatsoever, right?
Yeah, I definitely think that when it comes to testing these kinds of theories, people need to be very careful with their methods.
Most definitely, yeah. I mean, there's definitely a lot of research out there that is helpful, that talks about like, like autism may be sort of like a difference in like the brain, right? And that's personally to me a lot more believable than Tylenol and refrigerators and vaccines, right? But it's still most definitely like not 100% known, right? But there are things in the environment that might make somebody's diagnosis, they might need more support with it, and there's some things in their environment where they might need less support with it.
That makes a lot of sense. I think, it's good that there's a lot of research being done about this now. It sounds like there's a lot of myths being thrown into the mix with it.
Yeah, definitely.
but we're glad to have researchers such as yourself
Stop.
here to debunk those myths and kind of counteract those points with, actual scientific methods and good studies.
I'm always happy to talk about it.
Definitely something important to talk about for sure.
Yes, especially in the last year, it's definitely been a rough year for a lot of autistic individuals.
Definitely. I imagine psychology's been hit with funding cuts as well, as has everything.
Yes, most definitely. I know, specifically with PhD programs, specifically in psych, it's definitely gotten a lot smaller, which is really unfortunate. Something I'm really passionate about is clinical psychology, right, which is the basis of kind of my work. And clinical psychology is kind of gone, honestly. I know UC Irvine, they are not accepting PhD applicants anymore because of budget cuts.
Oh, that's awful.
I know. Yeah, so it's definitely, nationwide, it's definitely been hit.
Definitely. I think this is why it's so important to talk about it as well, to kind of shed light on why this kind of work is so important and why funding needs to be given
Exactly.
for these areas of research.
Most definitely.
Yeah, definitely. Last week we talked about pancreatic cancer and how that receives less funding as well. And so it is very important to talk about all of these research fields that are experiencing cuts in funding that are impacting the amount of research that's being done.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess moving on to what having autism might look like on a college campus, what do you think are some challenges that students might not realize that their autistic peers are dealing with, I guess, day to day?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think to answer that, we should open up with the discussion of what masking is, right?
What is masking?
Yeah, so masking is something that a lot of autistic individuals are forced into doing, and it's presenting as neurotypical despite, everything that's going on in their mind and body, So it's, even if they have, a million thoughts racing through their head and they're dealing with all these anxieties, it's still trying to present as a neurotypical individual, right? And along with that, it's also, holding back stimming, right? Like we talked about earlier, individuals who might shake their hands or different things like that to sort of help with the stimulation of the environment. They are able to do that as well because it's, through societal pressure of just wanting to appear neurotypical, right?
Oh man, that sounds exhausting.
Yes, most definitely.
Definitely.
Yeah, there's been a lot of work done on how, masking could lead to really unfortunate psychological outcomes. It's, this consistent chronic stress and, health psychologists, their whole game is that chronic stress is just horrible for you, right?
Right.
So yeah, I think leading into the larger conversation of like what individuals might not realize, autistic peers are dealing with, it's this constant stress, right? But then along with that, like we talked about earlier, this year has just been really difficult for autistic individuals. So I think it's just this, combination of all of these things that might be going on, and this is outside of their personal life. They might have 500 other things going on, and then being at UCLA too, all these classes, they really add up, right?
Gosh, definitely, bro. Like even a neurotypical person gets stressed out.
Exactly, yeah. So, to have this like heightened sense, it's definitely really difficult, and to not be able to express it in a way that, is natural for them. It's like holding in like so much at one time, So yeah, I think definitely being more mindful of just like how autistic individuals might be holding in all these emotions is really important for neurotypical peers.
Definitely. I do think that's important. So do you think like some environments on campus are more overwhelming than others, or do you think it's kind of just the whole thing?
As a neurotypical person, I must say, like, even for me, there's definitely areas on campus where I'm just like, oh my gosh, gosh, Bruin Walk always, I love the flyers. I'm always going to take a flyer.
I avoid Bruin Walk at all costs.
Oh yeah. I go through there, but then I feel bad if I don't take a flyer because everyone's so nice. So I'm like, okay, I'll take the flyer, right?
Definitely.
But yeah, I think that's a very overwhelming area on campus as well. Trying to think, Ackerman, Hot Mess Express.
Oh my gosh,
Getting
yeah. Food.
Ooh, yeah.
Dining halls, probably.
Dining hall is most definitely Epicure. Yeah, I can only imagine. Good Lord. But yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of areas on campus that can be really overwhelming, and given there is a lot of areas on campus that aren't that way, the Sculpture Garden can typically be a nice area to decompress, right? But sometimes, like if you have all of this inside of you and all of these, anxieties and worries and all of this like overwhelming feelings, it's sometimes not enough to just, sit in the grass. Sometimes you gotta just let it out, right?
Yeah.
So honestly, a lot of that can be comfort in somebody's home, right? Regardless of like dorm or apartment, that can be the most comfortable space for a lot of people because they can stop masking,
Definitely. Mm-hmm. I can definitely see that. I go to the sculpture garden very often, but like I feel like even sometimes when you're looking for like a quiet space, then one of those like elementary school tours will show up with like 60 kids.
And they're saying 6'7". I'm like, oh god.
Oh my god, not 6'7". They're like running around with a skibbity.
It's over, honestly.
It's so over. Peace of mind shattered. There's a botanical garden too. That's a pretty nice area.
Yes, I went there for the first time actually.
Really?
Like 2 days ago.
Oh my god,
beautiful.
Oh my gosh, I love going there. I just like sit there, and I feel like people are pretty peaceful there
most definitely.
Of the time.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think they just opened up like a whole new part of it, like with the waterfall. Like the water
wasn't
there before.
That's what I saw.
Yeah, I think that's all new. Like I hadn't seen that like last year.
I'm so lucky, truly. Wow. Love it.
Yeah, but I can definitely see like being at home being one of the more comfortable options.
Yes, and then I know a lot of people have talked about how going home is definitely it can be helpful and still have like an area to decompress. And if an autistic individual has had like an especially really difficult day, it's it can be nice to just let it out, but that's not considering roommates.
Yeah.
Right?
What if you have 2 random roommates?
Right, yeah, so definitely I agree. Me and Laura are roommates, so yeah, definitely I agree. It's I think I can't imagine just having such an overwhelming day and then going home and you can't even let it out. It's like it's got to be really difficult. So yeah, I know some people have tried to find more accessible housing, right, where they'd have a room to themselves or different things like that, right? But even that can be really difficult to come across, right, because you almost have to prove that you're autistic to.
That's awful.
Yeah, exactly, to some of the housing. So it can be really difficult for a lot of people to find something that fits their needs.
No, definitely, because I think like to get housing accommodations, you need like a doctor's note, right? Like you need an official.
Yes, and that definitely opens up a larger conversation of just like getting an autism diagnosis. I know in the last few years maybe I'm just also researching autism a lot, but there's a lot of work that's done on just like how quote unquote common autism is now. And the way that I kind of try to describe it is just like, relating it to like astrology, right? It's just like before,
Astrology.
Yeah, right, like the stars,
sorry,
right? So, before it's like we didn't know that there was all these stars in the sky because we didn't have a telescope. And then we got the telescope and we looked up and we saw, oh, there's all these stars in the sky, right? So similar to autism, it's like we didn't know that all these individuals were autistic, but now we have diagnosing professionals. And now we know that all these people have autism, right?
Right. It's because our tools got
that we
better.
have these tools now, right?
Yeah, we have tools now.
Exactly. So that's kind of the way that I try to describe it. Was it astronomy?
Astronomy is stars.
My
Astrology
bad.
is like I'm an Aries.
Oh, I'm a Cancer. So my bad, guys. I'm an astronomy, right?
No, you're so good.
But yeah, definitely. Now we have these like diagnosing professionals who are able to diagnose autism in a correct manner, right? But still, after you get this autism diagnosis, you aren't given the resources you need like immediately, right? And more so, it is so expensive, like somebody gets diagnosed with autism and they're in a very fortunate circumstance in which they can actually get, the resources that they might need, which, could be intervention, it could be cognitive behavioral therapy, it could be a lot of different things. That is amazing. It's always good for individuals to have what they need, right? But for a lot of people, they're not in that circumstance, right? So, somebody might get an autism diagnosis, God given that they get one, right? They're able to go to a physician and a neurologist and all these things. They're able to get an autism diagnosis, I'm sure after so much time and tribulation, right? Mm-hmm. But then what, right?
Yeah, I feel like getting a diagnosis in the first place sounds so difficult.
Yes.
And I think this is also like, I've heard this kind of same narrative across a lot of different diagnoses where there are increasing numbers of, I guess, people getting diagnosed with these. And I think a lot of people like to spin it in a way where it's, oh, like what is wrong with society that's causing people to, I guess, develop this? How when it really is just, oh, they're just getting diagnosed more.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's why it's important, too, is just, like, yeah, people are getting diagnosed more, right? I think the last statistic I saw was 1 in 31 people, right?
Okay.
And I think it's 3 times as common in boys than it is girls, right? But it doesn't mean that it's bad, right? I know a lot of people, a lot of autistic voices have come up and talked about how it's not, autism isn't this disorder it can be really difficult, if they're not getting the support that they need, but it's also a piece of their identity,
Yeah.
So it's never this thing of just like, oh, like, it's this terrible monster that's come about, it's just people are now having this new piece of their identity added, and they might need more support, but it's important that society is able to just give them that support and not point the finger and say, like, why is everyone quote-unquote autistic now? It's like, that's not what this is,
Definitely. And I imagine, like, it doesn't really change much about, I guess, the structure of how people live. Like, it's just like a diagnosis. So I feel like people get, I guess, there's a stigma around it where because of this increasing number of diagnoses, people, I guess, get scared that more people will get diagnosed with it. Whereas I feel like people that already are dealing with this are already kind of suffering from, I guess, not having the right support that they need. And so getting the support that they need is kind of life-changing, right? And so
yeah.
I feel like, well, getting diagnosed in the first case is so hard. So I guess, like, going off of that, why do you think that so many people discover they're autistic, like, so much later in their lives?
I think it definitely goes back to what we talked about earlier, where in the past, it was very much believed that, autistic people could only be, like, young white boys, right? Mm-hmm. Which is very much untrue, right? But that was very much the population that was focused on for a long time, and therefore a lot of autism research is based on that. There's a huge intervention that is called relationship development intervention, and it was created with a sample size of, like, 13 white boys.
Oh.
And it's like, okay, it's like maybe it is a good intervention and maybe it does work, but we don't know because we're not testing on, like, a good population. Like, we're not testing, like, obviously, like, young white boys should be included, but so should, like, every other member of the population, right? Like, we shouldn't be just so hyper-focused, right?
A little bit of a more diverse pool.
Exactly. Yeah, that's definitely very important. But, along with that, it's a lot of individuals are diagnosed later in life. It could be there. I think there's a lot of reasons. I don't think there's one direct answer. I think one of it could be, if an individual grew up with, like, a lower socioeconomic status, and now they're older and, they have access to healthcare and, cognitive neuroscientists and all these things like that. Now they have access to a physician who could diagnose them with autism, right? Mm-hmm. So that could be one reason. But then also, let's say that's not the reason, right? If we have, a young girl who's a person of color, right? And then, previously, if she tried to get a diagnosis for autism, and she was just told, like, oh, no, you can't, like, there's just no way that you have autism. And then later on in life, she's able to go back to a physician who does diagnose her correctly. That could be another reason. So it's definitely, I'm not saying, like, psychiatrists are bad or anything like that. I think, they're definitely very, assisting in a lot of ways, but there is a lot of issues within the healthcare system of, like, what autism looks like and how people could or could not have it, based on, like, what they look like and, like, their phenotypes and different things like that. I know a lot of people have talked about how they couldn't get diagnosed with autism because they weren't shy.
What?
It's like, well, that's not a DSM-5 characteristic, right?
Yeah.
That's been, like, a huge conversation, too, of just, like, autism is heterogeneous, it's not just, like, you have to behave in one specific way.
Right.
It really differs for each person.
Right, definitely. I think this is a very interesting conversation, and I feel like this also spans across a lot of different, like, diagnoses as well. Mm-hmm. And so, like, last week we talked about, I guess, how important it is to advocate for yourself. So, like, you know yourself better than anyone, and unfortunately there are medical professionals out there that will, I guess, gaslight you, for lack of better terms,
Yeah.
So it's very important to get second opinions and, not always, don't let yourself get brushed off, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's really unfortunate, like, people shouldn't have to, like, sit there and, like, go back to the physician and just, like, advocate that they, like, need more support or something. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately that is the case a lot of the time. But, I think it is really important, going to the physician for, whichever concern that you might have to, really be insistent with, like, your body, mind, and, behavior better than anybody else. The physician's job is to diagnose and give treatment if needed, but, your body better than anyone else,
Definitely. And I feel like, I don't know, I feel like there is a lot of definitely bias even still out there, which is unfortunate. But it's good to shed light on it and like kind of propel medical professionals to be better.
Yeah, most definitely.
Right?
Yeah.
So I guess going back to like communication and friendships, what are some small things I guess that peers can do to make interactions easier?
Yeah, I think, this was also about 2 weeks ago with my research assistants. We had a great discussion about this. They're the best, honestly. So we were talking about, what can we do to understand specifically what an autistic individual needs, right? And something that can be really dangerous is assuming that all autistic people need the exact same thing, right? Because, as we talked about, autism is different for each person who has it, right? So it's really important to ask, I think. I think a lot of people can be really intimidated by that. And just, scared of like what the person might say or what the person might do and different things like that. But in reality, I've heard from a lot of different autistic voices, which I'm really thankful for, is that they would rather have somebody ask than just assume what they need,
Right.
So, I guess in specific regards, if somebody's having like, a meltdown and, they need some sort of support, but they're not able to verbalize it, right? It's really important to just ask and just say like, oh, like, what can I do for you right now? Let them have control of the situation and try to figure out like, what you can do to help them, work through this. But then also it's just, I think asking is really just the best method. I think it can be intimidating in some aspects, but I feel like if you go at it through a lens of respect and, giving them the full autonomy over, what they need, I think that is, most definitely the best option.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like kind of taking the control of the situation yourself isn't the best route.
Yes, definitely. I think, giving them control and what they need, I think most definitely that can be the best thing for a lot of people.
Definitely, keeping the door open. So I think, yeah, that's very, sorry, I like totally just lost my train of thought. I think that is very important, is just opening the door to discussion and like asking what people need in moments of need and just generally, right? Like,
yeah, I think not even for autism a lot of the time, but just like for a lot of disorders, I think like we've reflected on, I honestly, it's like each person is an expert in like what they need, right?
Exactly.
Like as much as I wish I could, I cannot read your mind, right?
Yeah.
Right? So like it's best for me to just come to you and see like what I can do to help best support you and give you autonomy over the situation.
Exactly. Humans are like social creatures, and definitely I think opening the door to communication and like hearing what someone might need, like, like people can try to read minds, but I feel like that can very easily backfire. And so just asking is better. Like, even if it's a little, I mean, I don't really think it would be awkward.
Nah, I don't think so. I think there could be a large fear around it, but in reality, it's, I think, in some sense, trying to put yourself in their shoes and just be like, how would I feel if somebody came up to me specifically wanting to know how they could, like, best support me? I'd be overjoyed. I was like, yes, right? So yeah, I think it's definitely just, like, trying to understand that, like, it's gonna be okay. Like,
definitely.
you're doing, like, a good thing by trying to, like, best support somebody. It's nobody's gonna freak out, right? And if you say something wrong, like, if you, like, don't phrase something in the best way, just apologize. You just go, like, oh, I'm sorry. In the future, I will, right?
Right.
It doesn't have to be, like, a whole, like...
right, just move forward.
Just move forward. We don't have to reminisce on it. Like, we're gonna make it through this, and we're gonna be okay. We can apologize and move forward.
Definitely, very important. I think a lot of people do get afraid, I guess, of bringing up these topics for fear of, I guess, saying the wrong things.
Right. And, I think, like, throughout my work doing autism research is just, like, it's a learning process. And that's the beautiful thing about autism, is that truly it's always evolving. And something I really love is that, in recent years, autistic voices have been so much more prominent in the work that we're doing. It's always learning and accommodating your mindset, but that's like, everything you do in adulthood is learning and accommodating your mindset, so this isn't like completely out of the ordinary. You just have to be comfortable with like knowing you'll make mistakes and it's going to be Definitely.
And in the end, everyone gets more support, like everyone learns, everyone grows, and everyone's happy.
Win-win situation.
Exactly. So I guess moving on to a more like reflective portion of this radio show, what keeps you motivated to keep on doing your work?
I think honestly, I feel like I just have such a lovely, there's so many lovely people involved with everything I do, truly. You know, something really important to me is always incorporating autistic voices, and it's so important to me to be able to, you know, listen to what they have to say, you know, and it's truly just drives my work. And there's so much, you know, unequal treatment throughout the world, right? And then when you really open up the field of autism intervention, it's like, holy cow, right?
Right.
So, you know, truly it is really inspiring to me to have so many autistic voices speak up like about, you know, what they've gone through and what they need.
I imagine it's really great to see what kind of impact you're making as well. Like, something that's so, I guess, relevant to so many people.
Yeah, it's amazing, honestly. I'm such a lucky person to be able to, you know, hear about the things that people are going through and then, you know, drive my research on it. It's honestly, I'm incredibly lucky to be there. And then also I have the most amazing research team as well, and they've really shout out to Sarah, Angie, Miriam, Ambrose, and Jaden. They're honestly amazing, and they inspire me every single day. Like they're also just so like driven by like, you know, the process of, you know, our recent project talks about autism intervention, but then also a few different topics as well, you know, and they're so passionate about it that like, you know, there's no way that the project can end up bad because everyone's just so passionate about what they're doing, you know.
That's so great. It's so great to hear that there are such, like, passionate researchers out there. It gives me hope.
Right.
Yes. So I guess, like, what gives you hope right now in, like, autism research and advocacy? Like, what can we look forward to?
Yeah. I think, you know, definitely, I think a lot of the hope comes from, you know, it's been a rough year for, you know, autistic people, right? You know, most definitely with everything that's been going on. But also there's been so much work to combat that hate. You know, there's a lot of amazing things going into that. And then I know as well, you know, there has been like budget cuts and things like that. But I know like out there are similar, you know, cognitive scientists who think the same way that I do, which I'm incredibly lucky for. You know, even at UCLA, there's so many amazing staff members who, you know, just think the exact same way that I do through like the paradigm of neurodiversity, right? So it's truly, I'm incredibly lucky for that. But, you know, I'm hopeful because there's people who I get to work with who are so passionate about it, but then also staff here is so much further, you know, like in their professional career, and they have done so many amazing things in autism research that like, I know there's a future ahead for
definitely
like further research. Yeah,
definitely. It's so great to see so many passionate people. Like, people will not stop fighting for what is needed in the world of science, you know?
I know.
Like,
I love it.
Definitely. I love it. I love being at UCLA especially too, because so many of these people are so determined
Oh my gosh,
to continue doing research despite budget cuts, you know? Like, it's just such an important thing that's being done here.
Yeah, personally, our research project has like $0, and that's okay, you know. And we're still like doing like amazing research that we're so incredibly lucky to be able to do, you know, despite you know, despite all these budget cuts, like people are still determined to do like what they're passionate about, which is lovely.
It is so great. So this marks the end of our radio show. Thank you so much for joining us, Megan.
Yay.
I learned a lot.
Thank you so much.
Hopefully to our listeners, we hope you learned a lot about autism and how you can better support peers on campus and whatnot. And yeah, this is Morning Sign Out. Morning Sign In is the podcast. Morning Sign Out is the club. But make sure to tune in next week, 9 a.m. Tuesday. And thank you. Enjoy the rest of your morning.